Call security. Now. The hotel manager's voice cut through the marble lobby so sharply that even the pianist stopped playing. Every head turned toward the elderly man standing beneath the crystal chandelier. His gray coat was faded at the shoulders, his trousers were carefully patched near one knee, and rainwater dripped from his worn leather shoes onto the polished floor. In one hand, he held a small canvas backpack. In the other, he carried an old, leather-bound book pressed tightly against his chest. He looked painfully out of place among the businessmen in tailored suits, the women wearing diamond earrings, and the uniformed bellmen moving through the lobby like clockwork. The manager, Richard Hale, approached him with a thin, embarrassed smile. "Sir, this is a private hotel," he said. "The shelter is 3 blocks east." The old man glanced at the gold nameplate on Richard's jacket, then toward the ceiling, where warm light spilled across carved pillars and expensive paintings. "I'm not looking for a shelter," he replied quietly. "I'd like a room." A few guests laughed under their breath. Richard looked him up and down, lingering on the patched trousers and cracked shoes. "Our rooms start at $800 a night." The old man nodded. "I know." That simple answer seemed to irritate Richard more than anger would have. For the last 15 years, Richard had managed the Grand Whitmore Hotel as though it belonged to him. He knew the names of politicians, movie producers, and wealthy investors. He personally greeted guests who arrived in black cars and barely noticed those who carried their own luggage. Appearance, to Richard, was proof of worth. And the man before him looked worthless. 2 security guards appeared near the revolving doors. The old man did not argue. He did not reach for a credit card or demand special treatment. He simply looked around the lobby slowly, as though memorizing every detail: the fresh flowers on the reception desk, the gold clock above the elevators, the tired young receptionist trying not to meet his eyes. Then he noticed an elderly housekeeper kneeling near the entrance, gathering brochures that had fallen from a display stand. Without hesitation, he placed his old book on a chair and bent down to help her. Richard's face tightened. "Leave those," he snapped. "You're making a scene." The old man handed the last brochure to the housekeeper. Her hands trembled as she accepted it. "Thank you," she whispered. He smiled at her. It was the first warmth anyone had shown him since he stepped inside. One of the guards touched his arm. "Time to go, sir." The old man picked up his book. For a moment, the cover opened, revealing a faded photograph tucked between the pages, a young bellman standing proudly in front of the same hotel nearly 40 years earlier. Richard did not notice it. But the housekeeper did. Her face suddenly went pale. The old man walked toward the revolving doors, then stopped beneath the cold December rain. He turned back and looked directly at Richard. "Enjoy your final night as manager," he said. The laughter in the lobby disappeared. And before Richard could respond, the old man stepped into a waiting black car that had just pulled up to the curb. The black car carried the old man away from the Grand Whitmore, but Richard Hale remained frozen beneath the chandelier, staring through the glass doors as if he had just watched a ghost disappear into the rain. Then the pianist slowly began playing again. A few guests returned to their conversations. Someone laughed nervously. Within minutes, the lobby recovered its expensive calm. Richard forced a smile. "Just another confused old man," he said. But the elderly housekeeper near the brochure stand did not move. Her name was Margaret Cole. She had worked at the Grand Whitmore for 38 years, long enough to remember when the brass elevator doors had to be pulled open by hand and the rooftop ballroom still hosted weddings every Saturday night. She stared at the rain-streaked doors. "You know him?" Richard asked. Margaret lowered her eyes. "I'm not sure." Richard gave a dismissive laugh and walked away, but Margaret's hands continued trembling. Across the city, the old man sat silently in the back of the car, watching towers blur behind rivers of rain. His name was Samuel Whitmore, though almost no one at the hotel would have recognized it. Decades earlier, Samuel had been the youngest bellman the hotel had ever hired. He had arrived in the city at 17 with $11, one spare shirt, and the leather-bound book now resting in his lap. The book had belonged to his father, a railroad worker who had died before Samuel finished school. Inside its cover, his father had written one sentence: "Never judge the condition of a man's coat before you know the way he is carried." Samuel had read those words on nights when hunger kept him awake in a rented basement. He had read them after wealthy guests handed him a few coins without looking at his face. And he had read them the night the hotel's original owner found him sleeping in the laundry room because Samuel could no longer afford rent. Instead of firing him, the owner had given him food, a small room, and a second chance. That act of kindness changed everything. Samuel studied accounting at night. He worked mornings carrying luggage and evenings cleaning conference rooms. Years later, he left the hotel to build a small property business. That business became a national investment company, but Samuel never spoke publicly about his beginnings. He kept the old photograph in his father's book to remind himself that success was not the suit a man wore. It was the person he refused to become. The car stopped outside a modest brick house on the edge of the city. Samuel lived there alone despite owning homes he rarely visited. His driver turned around. "Mr. Whitmore, should I contact the board?" Samuel looked down at his soaked coat. "Not yet. Mr. Hale humiliated you." Samuel gently closed the old book. "No," he said. He revealed himself. That evening, Richard returned to his office on the hotel's top floor. He poured himself a drink and looked through tomorrow's schedule. At 9 o'clock, the hotel's board of directors would announce the completion of its sale to an unnamed private investor. Richard had spent weeks preparing. He expected a promotion, perhaps even a partnership offer from the new owner. He leaned back in his chair and smiled at the city lights. Meanwhile, Margaret sat alone in the basement staff room. From her locker, she removed an old newspaper clipping. The photograph showed a young bellman beside the hotel's founder. The young man's eyes were unmistakable. Margaret whispered the name printed beneath the picture: Samuel Whitmore. Then she looked toward the ceiling, where Richard's office stood high above her. For the first time that night, she understood the old man's warning. Tomorrow, the hotel would not simply meet its new owner. It would be judged by him. By 8 the next morning, the Grand Whitmore looked flawless. Fresh lilies stood in silver vases. The marble floors gleamed beneath the chandeliers. Every employee had been warned to smile, stand straight, and speak only when necessary. Richard Hale moved through the lobby inspecting everything with the impatience of a man preparing to inherit a kingdom. "Replace those flowers," he told a receptionist. "The white ones look cheap." "They arrived this morning, sir." Then they arrived wrong. He checked his reflection in the elevator doors and adjusted his silk tie. In less than an hour, the new owner would arrive, and Richard was determined to appear indispensable. Margaret stood near the front desk in her gray housekeeping uniform, watching him. She had barely slept. The newspaper clipping remained folded inside her pocket, along with the memory of Samuel Whitmore walking into the rain with his father's old book pressed to his chest. She had considered warning Richard. But she remembered the way he had laughed. Some truths, she thought, could not be taught gently. At 8:45, a young bellman named Daniel entered the lobby carrying a box of bottled water. One of the bottles slipped, rolled across the floor, and stopped near Richard's polished shoes. Richard's face darkened. "Do you understand what today means?" Daniel bent down quickly. "It was an accident. People who make accidents don't last in hotels like this." The young man's cheeks burned. He had started only 3 weeks earlier and sent most of his pay to his mother, who was recovering from surgery. Margaret stepped forward. "I asked him to carry too much." Richard looked at her coldly. "Then perhaps neither of you belongs on this floor." The lobby fell silent. Daniel picked up the bottle without saying another word. At exactly 9, 3 black cars stopped outside. Richard's expression changed instantly. His shoulders relaxed, and a welcoming smile appeared on his face. The board members entered first, followed by lawyers, financial advisors, and the hotel's regional directors. Richard hurried toward them. "Welcome to the Grand Whitmore. Everything is ready." The board chairman, Evelyn Ross, did not return his smile. Where is Mr. Whitmore? Richard blinked. Before she could answer, the revolving doors turned. Samuel stepped into the lobby. He wore the same faded gray coat, the same patched trousers, the same cracked leather shoes. And beneath one arm, he carried the same old book. Richard stared at him, then gave a nervous laugh. I'm sorry, ma'am. This man was removed yesterday. Security must have missed him. No one moved. Samuel crossed the marble floor slowly, rain still shining on his shoulders. Richard raised his voice. Security. The guards approached, but Evelyn lifted one hand. Stop. She turned toward Richard. Mr. Hale, this is Samuel Whitmore. Richard's smile disappeared. The new owner, she continued. The entire lobby seemed to lose its air. Samuel looked first at Margaret, then at Daniel, who still held the fallen bottle in his hand. Finally, he faced Richard. You judged me in 30 seconds, Samuel said. Today, I'm going to see how many others you judged the same way. Richard swallowed. Sir, I can explain. Samuel placed the old book on the front desk. I hope so. Then he turned to the staff. Before anyone is dismissed today, I want every employee file brought to the ballroom. Evelyn frowned slightly. Every file? Samuel nodded. Especially the ones marked terminated. Margaret's eyes widened. Because hidden inside those files was something Richard had spent years making sure no owner would ever see. The ballroom doors closed at 9:30. Outside, the hotel continued serving coffee, carrying luggage, and answering telephones. Inside, more than 20 department heads sat beneath crystal chandeliers while cardboard boxes of employee records covered the long conference table. Richard stood near the windows, his face pale but composed. Samuel took the chair at the head of the table. His faded coat remained buttoned over his old shirt, as though he wanted everyone to remember exactly how they had first seen him. Begin with the dismissals, he said. A human resources director opened the first box. The files told the same story again and again. A dishwasher fired after requesting 2 days to care for his sick wife. A receptionist dismissed after becoming pregnant. A maintenance worker removed for reporting damaged electrical wiring. A housekeeper accused of stealing a guest's bracelet, even though no evidence had been found. Every document carried Richard's signature. They were performance decisions, Richard said. A luxury hotel survives on standards. Samuel opened his old leather-bound book and wrote something on a blank page. Standards without compassion become cruelty. Richard's jaw tightened. Then Daniel entered with a small flash drive in his hand. He looked terrified. Margaret walked beside him. Samuel had asked every employee to bring forward anything they believed the board should see. Most had remained silent. Years of fear had trained them well. Daniel had not. I found this behind the front desk printer, he said. It contains security footage backups. Richard stepped forward immediately. That employee accessed confidential property. Samuel did not look away from Daniel. Show us. A screen lowered from the ballroom ceiling. The first recording showed Richard ordering staff to move an exhausted family out of the lobby because their clothes were wet from a storm. The second showed him forcing an elderly porter to continue working after the man nearly collapsed. Then Margaret selected another file. The date appeared on the screen, 11 months earlier. A wealthy guest was seen leaving the dining room and placing a diamond bracelet inside her own handbag. Minutes later, she returned, shouting that it had been stolen. Richard appeared in the footage. He watched the recording with the security supervisor. Then he ordered it deleted. The room went still. The woman accused of theft had been a housekeeper named Elena Ruiz. A single mother who had worked at the hotel for 12 years. Richard had fired her that same afternoon to protect the reputation of the wealthy guest. Samuel's hand tightened around the edge of the table. You knew she was innocent. Richard stared at the frozen image on the screen. The guest threatened legal action. I protected the hotel. No, Samuel said quietly. You protected money from the truth. Evelyn opened Elena's personnel file. Inside was a final handwritten statement. I did not steal anything. Please check the cameras. My daughter believes I am an honest woman. I need her to keep believing that. Samuel read the words twice. Then he closed his eyes. When he opened them, the calm in his face had changed into something heavier. Find Elena, he ordered. The human resources director searched the computer. After several seconds, she looked up. She applied for work here again last month. Richard frowned. That's impossible. She was rejected before the application reached review. Samuel turned slowly toward him. By whom? No one needed to answer. At that moment, a commotion rose beyond the ballroom doors. A woman's voice pleaded with someone in the hallway. I only need 5 minutes. The doors opened. Elena stood there in a worn cleaning uniform from another building, holding the hand of a teenage girl. Her eyes moved across the executives until they stopped on Richard. Then her daughter lifted a small silver bracelet and placed it on the table. My mother found this outside your hotel last night, the girl said. She came back because she still believes returning what isn't yours matters. No one in the room spoke. Samuel looked at the bracelet, then at Elena's exhausted face. In that moment, the poorest person in the ballroom had proved richer in character than everyone who had allowed her name to be destroyed. Samuel stared at the silver bracelet on the table. It was not valuable enough to change anyone's life. Yet Elena had crossed the city to return it to a hotel that had taken away her job, her reputation, and nearly her daughter's faith in her. That was what silenced the ballroom. Not the bracelet. The integrity behind it. Samuel rose slowly and reached for the old leather-bound book he had carried through the rain. Its cover was cracked, and the corners had been worn smooth by decades of use. Richard looked at it with confusion. Until that moment, he had seen it only as another shabby possession belonging to a shabby man. Samuel opened the book to the faded photograph of himself as a 17-year-old bellman. Beside the picture was the sentence his father had written before he died. Never judge the condition of a man's coat before you know the weight he is carried. My father left me this book, Samuel said. For a long time, it was the only thing I owned. He turned another page. Pressed inside was an old restaurant receipt and a handwritten note yellowed by time. Margaret covered her mouth. She recognized the handwriting. 40 years earlier, before Samuel had money or a place to sleep, Margaret had worked in the hotel kitchen. One winter night, she found him hiding near the laundry room, shivering in his uniform after his shift. He had not eaten in 2 days. Margaret had wrapped bread in warm soup and a towel and placed them beside him. Samuel had been too ashamed to accept them. So she had slipped the receipt into his book and written one line on the back. You can repay me by helping someone else when you can. The hotel's original owner later discovered Samuel sleeping downstairs. After hearing what Margaret had done, he gave the young bellman a room and paid his first semester of night school. Neither act seemed extraordinary at the time. A bowl of soup. A safe room. A chance to study. But those small acts had traveled across 40 years and returned as the man now standing at the head of the ballroom. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. You kept that? Samuel looked at her. It kept me. He turned toward the board members. I did not buy this hotel because my name is on the building. I bought it because this was the first place where someone saw value in me before I had anything valuable to show. Richard lowered his gaze. Samuel then faced Elena and her daughter. The hotel failed you, he said. And so did every person who knew enough to ask questions but chose silence. Elena tightened her grip on her daughter's hand. I don't want charity. You deserve justice, Samuel replied. He ordered the footage preserved and Elena's record corrected immediately. Her lost wages would be repaid, along with compensation for the damage done to her name. But Samuel was not finished. He opened the book once more and removed a sealed envelope. Inside was a proposal he had prepared before ever entering the hotel in his old clothes. It described a new employee protection office, independent from hotel management, where workers could report mistreatment without risking their jobs. At the bottom was the name of its proposed director: Margaret Cole. She stared at him in disbelief. "I'm only a housekeeper." Samuel smiled gently. "So was I, once, only a bellman." Then he looked toward Elena. "And I need someone beside her who knows what injustice costs." Richard finally stepped forward. "Mr. Whitmore, please. I made mistakes, but I built this hotel's reputation." Samuel closed the book. "No, Richard. People like them built it." He pointed toward the housekeepers, porters, cooks, and receptionists standing along the ballroom wall. Then he pulled out the empty chair beside him. "Elena," he said, "please sit here." As she approached the table, Richard realized the decision about his future would not be made only by the new owner. It would be made in front of every person he had once believed was too powerless to matter. Richard stood alone beside the windows while the people he had ignored for years filled the ballroom behind him. No one shouted at him. No one mocked him. That silence hurt more than anger. Samuel remained at the head of the table, his father's old book resting beneath one hand. Elena sat beside him, still uncertain whether she truly belonged in that chair. Margaret stood near the employees, tears shining in her eyes. Richard finally removed the gold nameplate from his jacket. "For 15 years, he said, I thought protecting this hotel meant protecting its image." Samuel looked at him steadily. "And what do you think now?" Richard glanced toward Daniel, the young bellman he had threatened that morning. Then he looked at Elena and her daughter. "I was protecting my position." The admission seemed to take something out of him. His shoulders dropped, and for the first time, he did not look like a powerful manager. He looked like a frightened man who had spent years measuring his worth through other people's fear. Samuel stood. "Your employment ends today." Richard closed his eyes. There was no argument left. But Samuel continued. "You will receive what the law requires. Nothing more, nothing less. And every decision made under your authority will be reviewed." Richard placed the nameplate on the table. Before leaving, he stopped beside Elena. "I cannot undo what I did." "No," she replied. "But you can stop pretending it was necessary." Richard nodded once and walked out of the ballroom. No security guards escorted him. He crossed the same marble lobby where he had humiliated Samuel the night before. Guests barely noticed him as he stepped through the revolving doors and disappeared into the cold morning rain. Inside, the hotel began changing. Elena was offered a position in the new employee protection office, working beside Margaret. At first, she refused. She feared accepting anything connected to the place that had hurt her. Then her daughter touched her hand. "Maybe someone else will need you." Elena looked around at the housekeepers and kitchen workers waiting quietly near the wall. She accepted. Daniel was allowed to keep his job. More than that, Samuel arranged for the hotel to help cover his mother's remaining medical bills through a new staff emergency fund. The elderly porter seen struggling in the security footage was given paid leave and a lighter position when he returned. Former employees received letters explaining that their cases were being reopened. Some came back. Others did not. But each one finally received something Richard had denied them, the truth. Weeks later, the Grand Whitmore reopened its renovated lobby. The marble remained. The chandeliers still glittered. Wealthy guests continued arriving in expensive cars. Yet one thing had changed. A framed page now hung behind the reception desk. It contained the sentence from Samuel's father's book. "Never judge the condition of a man's coat before you know the weight he has carried." Below it was the old photograph of Samuel as a bellman. On the opening morning, Samuel entered through the revolving doors wearing the same faded gray coat. The staff recognized him immediately. This time, no one called security. Daniel hurried forward with a smile. "Welcome home, Mr. Whitmore." Samuel looked around the lobby, then at Margaret and Elena standing behind the desk. "No," he said softly. "Welcome to a hotel that finally remembers who built it." He later created a scholarship in the name of the original owner and the kitchen worker who had once given him soup. Every year, it helped hotel employees study, train, and build futures beyond the uniforms they wore. Because Samuel understood what Richard never had. A person's value is not revealed by polished shoes, expensive clothes, or the title printed beneath a name. It is revealed by how they treat someone who appears to have nothing to offer. And sometimes, the stranger we push away today may return tomorrow, not to destroy us, but to expose the person we have chosen to become. If this story touched you, share it with someone who believes kindness still matters. Tell us in the comments whether Samuel made the right decision, and remember to like and subscribe for more stories that remind us never to judge a life by its cover.